Assalamu alaikum, bachcho. The topic that we are going to do today is cultural poetics or new historicism. Cultural, as the word tells you, that it is basically your lifestyle. Cultural is derived from culture, which includes everything that is related to your life, that is your the way you behave, the way you dress up, the way you talk, everything is included in culture. Poetics is the art of appreciating or the art of interpreting. So this term tells you that cultural poetics is basically the interpretation of a text with perspective to the culture in which that text is being produced. Okay. New historicism. Why is it given the name New Historicism? You'll be knowing it in the course of this lecture that be- uh, 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 um, most of the earlier critics thought of cultural poetics being a form of old historicism in which history formed the base of uh, every text. And uh, uh, it was a common belief that uh, any text that is produced has to have a historical background. However, you'll come to know about the differences between the two, that is, new historicism and old historicism, during this class. So, again, I'm reminding you that you have to mention that your answer is according to the book Literary Criticism, An Introduction to Theory and Practice, 5th edition by Charles E. Bressler. I think you will be getting the inverted view of the book. However, I'm sure you don't have to worry about that. Just please mention this in every answer you are attempting. So let's proceed. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So this chapter starts with an introduction to the background of new historicism or cultural poetics, and what formed the basis of new historicism was the very popular theory that was in vogue at that time for literary interpretation, and that was new criticism. What new criticism believed in was the exclusiveness, or the high quality, uh, uh, exclusiveness ness of the uh, literary text, that for interpretation only you need to have the text. You do not have to, at that time, you did not have to link the text to the writer, his experiences, his background, or the reader, the response of the reader. You did not have to depend on that. Then the context was not important. Everything was the text in inverted commas. Like I've put here around theory of literature. So every thing was related, or every textual interpretation uh, was to be made through the text only. And Rene Velix Wellick and Austin Warren's, their book, Theory of Literature, which was produced in 1942, was considered to be the Bible of literary analysis for the subsequent 3 decades. So, uh, why is it called the Bible of literary analysis? Because it provided you a guideline, a strict guideline according to which interpretations could be made. However, the writer moves on to give you an example of a new critical lecture, which is basically an interpretation of King Lear, of an extract from King Lear. You have already done it in your classical and Renaissance drama with Mam Zainab. So, King Lear was basically a story, a drama of a king uh, who had been deceived by two of his daughters, to whom he had bequeathed his kingdom, and because the third daughter, whom he loved the most, did not lie or could not lie in front of King Lear. Now, basically, it's a tragedy, and according to new critical perspective, we cannot provide the background of this text beforehand. However, what the example that the writer is giving here is about the evil happenings that are occurring, planning of murder, planning of exile, and everything, because of the eclipses which were taking place in the sky. So, here, this lecture tells you how uh, these natural happenings were connected to, or something negative that was happening in the nature was affecting the people. So, uh, uh, this link basically provided, it tells you about how new critical readings were done. That is, uh, uh, the only dependence was there on the text, and how the text told us, told the reader, not us, the reader, uh, that uh, everything that is happening in a certain text has to be interpreted exclusively exclusively on the basis of what is written. That is it. It did not have to be related to the outside environment, about to the writer even. So then comes the heading of old historicism. So, the writer first tells you about the dependence of uh, o- old historicism on history. And history, according to old historicism, became the only background for literature, or provided the only background for literature. Moreover, it also old historicism also believed that a literary text was a piece of art, and because it is a piece of art, it is basically an object which has to be interpreted. Object is something which is becomes the which assumes primary focus. So here, the literary text in old historicism gained importance because of the it was or historical context it was implanted in. How and This is page 182, and here they are the writer is telling you that the historical background of a text would be of primary concern in the while interpreting a certain text. Let me check. Maybe I've written something wrong. Yes, I have. I'm sorry, girls. This is um, a primary importance, not secondary importance. Maybe I'm sorry for this mistake. See, I'm correcting it right now so that you do not make any such mistake in your in your paper. Yes. So primary importance. Then old historicism also believed that history was absolute and accurate, and that history could not be challenged. However, in the last paragraph on page 182, the writer is again giving you the example of Elizabethan view, which tells you that Elizabethans had various, they had certain assumptions regarding human life, which were affecting the texts of that time as well. And you can take the example of the text which has been interpreted on page 182, which tells you that uh, the life of man is being maligned because of the eclipses that are taking place. Similarly, in uh, 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 there when there is you're talking about Macbeth, there is a use of thunder, and it seems as if that thunder is I don't remember the scene exactly. However, that thunder is telling you about it is foreboding evil. It is because of the thunder, it seems as if the murder of King Duncan is. Carried out. So, old historicists believed that your life was connected to the real life, the history of a certain period, or the real life in the history of a certain time period was affected by the nature uh, you know sorry the literature of a certain period was affected by the background of the historical background in which it was produced. Now, then the writer moves on to tell you about the new historicism, which emerged in the 1970s and 1980s. They are actually new historicism and cultural materialism, or cultural poetics. They are the same things. So, however, the nomenclature is different because in America, this theory was called New Historicism, and in Great Britain, it was called cultural materialism. And basically, this. a new theory. It challenged the tenets, the principles of new criticism and old historicism. So here he is telling you, the writer is telling you on page 183 how how the new historics countered the various established beliefs of that time. And what were the established beliefs? That historians can articulate a unified and internally consistent worldview. Two things have been mentioned here. Something one is unified. See, it means that a text can be interpreted in one way only. So the new historics challenge this. Number one. Secondly, internally consistent worldview of any given people, country, or era, and can reconstruct an accurate and objective picture of any historical event, are key assumptions that cultural poetics or new historicism challenges. The second thing that new historicists challenge is that there is a consistent worldview of a certain group. So he says that this consistent worldview is neither possible nor can it be applied to any group. You can take in order to understand this concept, you can take the example of our partition, the partition of India and Pakistan. See, if history had been so so perfect, or it had been so accurate, our heroes would have been considered heroes by the people living in India, and we would be doing the same. However, uh, what the new historicists believe is that history is actually not an objective discourse. It is a discourse, number one. It is telling you about how people lived at a certain time. However, it is subjective. How is it subjective? Because every person relates a certain or interprets a certain thing according to his own experiences and his interpretation of or his view of the world. So history cannot be conf- uh, confirmed. Then here he's telling you about how history um, uh, uh, becomes discourse. History, by telling you what were the political happenings of that time, what was the literature that was being proved at the written at that time, what type of persons were there, what type of life they were leading, what era they had. He's new historicists believe that that can never be provided. Nothing can be objective. Nothing in history can be objective. Then the writer identifies certain commonalities that exist between the various adherents of cultural poetics. Number one is that the new historicists believe that all the human activities are interrelated. Everything is connected, whether it is the social background, whether it is the political background, whether it is the way of living, whether it is the approach towards life. Everything is connected. Secondly, admits to own prejudices. Yeah, all new historicists admit that history is affected by our prejudices, by our likes and dislikes. Third thing they say, what they say is, gives a more complete understanding of a text than does the old historicism and other interpretive approaches. So, old historicism is basically a confined sort of a school of thought which believes that only history can provide background of a certain literary text, whereas the new historians believe that this is not the case. They include other aspects of culture as well. Then comes the historical development of the theory. So, the writer traces the historical development of new historicism to Renaissance. So, in Renaissance, when because it was the time, it was the richest time that or fertile, the most fertile time that produced not only literature but also gave birth to various theories that helped in interpreting literature. So this writer, he believes that the roots of new historicism lie in the Renaissance, where there was, you know, people were discovering how to interpret literature. And uh, here he's giving you the example of Shakespeare as well, because he says that Shakespeare is he brought many innovations into writing. So when he brought these innovations, it is because of his writings that we find that your literature is and cannot be studied alone, exclusively. You can take the example of The Merchant of Venice, written by Shakespeare. It is not only the hatred, it is not only the story of hatred between Shylock and Antonio. You also find that the this you know that play, it also tells us about the anti-Semitic beliefs that were anti-Semitic are uh, anti-Jewish beliefs that were prevailing at that time. So this proves that or telling of or portraying of such beliefs in the play suggests that there is some sort of uh, uh, you know the external environment is affecting or it affects the texts, the literary production of that time. So he says that the writer himself, he adds a line: in literature can be found history, and in history much literature. So he says that the second phase of or the re-emergence of this new historicism took place in 1970s and 80s with the publication of three very important literary you know two of literary pieces, and both all three of these literary pieces were related to, they promoted the some of the basic tenets of new historicism. First two of them, these are the first two. These are basically essays. And the first, and this one, Stephen Greenblatt is considered to be the father of new historicism, or his scholarly articles became the foundation of this tale. So, Renaissance self-fashioning from Moore to Shakespeare by Stephen Greenblatt in 1980. This essay. Then there is Eliza, Queen of Shepherds, and the Pastoral of Power by Louis Montrose in 1980. And then these two were essays. Then there was another journal which had various articles, scholarly journal, which was edited by Greenblatt in 1982. And all these three treatises were basically they can easily be considered the foundation of or the first articles that promoted new historicism. Then there are other works as well, which uh, uh, you know promoted new historicism, and they have been mentioned on page 184 of your book. So for the first journal that was written was or that was printed was uh, uh, edited by Greenblatt, and it was called Yondra. And the next one was called Representations. It was again edited by Greenblatt, Svetlana Applers, and others, the other like-minded people in 1983. Now, girls, you can see that these are uh, 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 the writer has not added this journal, or he has not mentioned this journal in the first paragraph of page 184. Rather, he has separated it. The reason of this is that up till now, in the early 1980s, every writer was telling about the importance of history and other such and culture, the influence of history and culture on writing. However, none of them up till 1983 had discussed the literary creations as being powerful. It is in these three writings that we find are research articles basically, and they are which propagated that every piece of literature or literary texts, they held power. The first one is Discipline in Different Voice, Bureaucracy, Police, Family, and Bleak House by D.A. Miller. And he believes that literature or literary production is, it has power. And the terms he uses is they are the vehicles of power. They help you in empowering. And he had another concept as well, which was that literary texts are embedded in social and political discourses. Your the time in which a certain piece of literature is written, that is affected by the social and political changes of that time. Number one. Number two is Shaping Fantasies by Luis A. Mentros, who says that literary productions or literary texts they are seats of power. That is, a person who is producing text or the writer, he is all powerful. He has the power to control each and every mindsets. Then the third important treatise in this new historical development of new historicism is James I and the Politics of Literature. James I, or you can, I think this is James I, and the Politics of Literature, Johnson, Shakespeare, Donne, and their contemporaries. Here again, he's talking about the Elizabethan writers. This is by Jonathan Goldberg. And he, what he promotes is that it is not only literature that is creating history or that is powerful, but there are historical eras which develop their own modes of power, which develop their own narrative, which develop their own discourse. It is through discourse. Now, girls, this example, this is basically an example I'm relating. Now, through discourse, we have come to know that Queen Elizabeth patronized art and culture and history, and it is because of her liking for all this creativity and scientific advancement that Elizabethan era is considered to be the most fertile of eras. uh, we could not have got to this conclusion without any support from literary texts or the scientific productions of that time. So it is the discourse that has been developed through the study of history or historical eras that we come to know that Elizabethan era was very productive or very fertile and which produced a lot of literature. However, these three, that's why I told you to keep in mind that these three have been separated from the above three treatises, the essays and that journal. Now, I'm repeating again because it is uh, through this journal representations that we come to know that that literature can be considered as a powerful mode. So, literature has power. As history has power, so does have literature. So then the writer moves on to the major concerns of that time. And what are the major concerns that he that the new historicists they challenge or refute old historicism, number one, because old historicism, girls, you might get a question on this as well. What is the difference between old historicism and new historicism? So the um, you what you are going to tell in that answer is that old historicism confined itself to history, whereas new historicism they believe or the new historicists they believed that culture, it's not only history that is important, but it is culture, history, society, and other factors. Other factors include your belief system, the morality you are following, the religions of a certain time, then politics. It plays a very important role. They believed, the new historicists believed that all these things are important, whereas old historicism only believed in the importance of history. History was not, or new historicists did not consider history to be the sole factor or sole contributor to the to the production of literary literature. So then the writer is giving you the example of some post-structuralist critics who are Sean Francois, Lyotard, and Frederick Jameson. uh, they he is adopting their point of view, and he asserts that art and society are interrelated, but no scholar can use one and only one theoretical stance of school of criticism to disentangle this complex web of interrelationships. It is Greenblatt who uh, who promoted that everything in this life is interconnected. Every factor contributes to your perception of life, or not only your perception of your of life, but also to what you write. Then after that, the writer, he's giving the whole explanation how society is affected by how uh, literary patterns are determined by the society, and how society is determined by the literary patterns or literature that is produced. Number two, the writer moves on to refuting some of the basic principles of new criticism. The basic one is, or the most important one is, the that text can survive alone or it can be interpreted alone. So here, the writer is giving you the example of all those new critics, including T.S. Eliot, Ellen Tate, John Grove Ransom, Clent Brooks, and Robert Penn Warren, who were not only revered, they were not only liked by the people, or their uh, interpreted interpretive procedures were adopted by the new critics, but they were renowned writers themselves as well. So here the writer tells you that all these people promoted that text is an uh, autolytic, sorry, uh, uh, artifact. That is, it can survive alone, it can live alone, it can be interpreted alone. Now, girls, in you can here they have not used the word autolytic artifact. However, it is their autotelic, sorry, artifact. It is there on page 304, which tells you which you would find the definition there. Autotelic artifact. This term was first used by the new critics who believed that the text is autonomous. These two beliefs, that the text is not autonomous and history is not the sole factor that contributes to literary production, they became the major concerns of new historicism. So again, the same thing is being repeated. Okay. Now come to page 186, where we are being told about what sort of uh, what became the foundation of new historicism. So here, the, you know, we come to know that new historicism at that time, before new historicism and new criticism was in vogue, people were challenging some of the post-structuralists. They were challenging the basic, tenets of of new criticism. And it is it is through this challenging of basic uh, uh, tenets of new criticism that many other forms of criticism were born. For example, the Marxist theorists, the deconstructionists, the or feminists and Lacanian psychoanalytical theorists, they were, they started to present their theories. So we come to know in on page 186, we come to know that what became the foundation of um, new historicism was the dependence on cultural studies. So it is Foucault who believed and Michel Foucault, uh, and there were other post-structuralists who believed that, culture and society and history, they uh, everything impacted literature. Number one. And then on page 186, this is the second last paragraph, we come to know that his belief that culture is the combined form of human experience. It is not one thing. Culture is something that is more spread, it is more pervasive. Then we come to know about, in the next paragraph, we come to know that these cultural poetics, it suggests that there is no confirmed, nothing confirmed in interpretation, and there is no finality in interpretation. So, because history can never be final, similarly, the interpretation of a text cannot be final. So, and again, the writer is repeating that there is, you know, and nothing can produce, or no one can produce an objective history of any situation. So, for that, in order to explain you the concept of history, the writer first tells us that these people, this Foucault, they he basically redefined literature, history, the term history. And this term history, will come to know about it later. However, here the writer is telling you, giving you the concept that it is a text. A text is something which is a text is basically culture. So every literary production tells you about the way you are living, okay, and what sort of life you are leading. So there is no clear, the writer believes that there can be no, according to the new historicists, there can be no confirmed way of interpreting texts. However, he defines literary cultural poetics as a practice of literary interpretation that is still in process, one that is continually redefining and fine tuning its purposes, its philosophy, and its practices while gaining new followers. The adherents of there are many adherents of cultural poetics. However, and it is it was a new theory, people started to follow that as well. So there is a diverse, uh, people belonging to various schools of thoughts. They are, they have started to follow cultural materialism and new historicism. However, there are certain commonalities, and the first one is that they believe, all new historicists believe, that there is a historical consciousness. That is, history. It is the it is basically the relationship between history and the text that uh, uh, that is important. Then they declare that history and literature must be seen as disciplines to be analyzed together. They should not be separated. Then all texts need to be placed in appropriate context, and they also believe that while we are researching and learning about different societies that provide the historical context for various texts, we are simultaneously learning about ourselves, our own habits, and our own beliefs. We are through coming to know of the other histories and other literatures, we are determining our way of life as well, our history as well, our literature as well. Then comes the term, the nomenclature, explanation of the term cultural materialism. The writer tells you four or five qualities of this term. First of all, it is a British branch of cultural poetics. Then it is Marxist in nature. Why is it a Marxist in nature? Because when you study a certain history or historical period or a text, automatically you have a preference for one thing or the other. So it means that that thing that is liked by you gains hegemony, and when it gains a hegemony, we need to keep in mind that nothing can be in power forever. Okay, sometimes the oppressor is in power, at other times the oppressed are in power. So we need to keep in mind that a culture's hegemony is unstable. Then it is the literature. A third thing is that literature can serve as an agent of change, and because whenever there is change, it means that nothing can remain stable for, or nothing can remain powerful forever. So again, he suggests you, or they suggest you to read against the grain instead of following whatever is being written. So they believe that you should, or the reader should, have an unconventional, approach towards literature. Then the last thing he tells us about literary about cultural materialism is that these critics expose the political unconscious of texts and debunk the social and political myths created by the bourgeoisie. They obviously there was a time when the bourgeoisie, when they were in control, everything, whatever the bourgeoisie said, was considered respectable as, or esteemed. He says that it is through this study that we can look at the point of view of the proletariats as well. Then he explains the concept of new historicism. You might get a question that, a short question, especially, how is cultural materialism different from new historicism? You are going to you are going to reproduce these two paragraphs. So, new historicism is basically an American branch of cultural poetics, and the originator of this theory is Stephen Greenblatt. However, they promote that culture is it permeates, or it enters both texts and critics. It influences both texts and critics. And because your society is so interwoven, it is so interrelated that you cannot separate your text from culture and culture from text. So, this relationship is going to continue forever. However, in order to define, tell you or convince you what is power or how these things get power, the literary production gets power, they need to redefine the concept of history. From here, we move to the assumptions of new criticism. There are basically two assumptions of new criticism. Number one is that all human activities are interconnected. That is, you cannot separate your text from your culture, and your culture cannot be separated from the text. Number one, and then text alone cannot be considered enough for interpretation. And I have marked all these the important lines in this uh, passage. uh, you are going to find a repetition of all these ideas throughout this uh, chapter. So, when you say that every human activity is interlinked or interconnected, it means that your whatever you are doing, the way you are leading your life is becoming a part of history. So it is this uh, word history which is redefined by Michel Foucault. Okay, so on page 188, we find this French philosopher who who is among the pioneers of new historicism. He believes that history is not linear. He presents his definition of history, but before that, he convinces you why is there a need to, redefine history. He believes that history is not linear. It is not happening in a sequence. It does not have a definite beginning, middle, and end. However, he also says that it is not teleological. Teleological means that it is not coming towards a final conclusion. You can't say that it is history is something which it is history is providing you an account of something that happened that or of an action which receives a reaction. History is not like that. It is more complex. You are according to him, the definition of Foucault, history can be defined as the complex interrelationship of a variety of discourses or the various ways artistic, social, political, and so on that people think and talk about their world. So, your history is nothing but a collection of various discourses which you know we which people discuss, which people um, you know discuss over time. Then there is a very important concept that he gives is that history is, or it is through this discourse that episteme arises. The definition of episteme is has been given on page 309 of your glossary as well. He says that through language and thought, each period in history develops its own perceptions concerning the nature of reality. It is that is episteme is basically the development of narrative. It is the development of discourse. whether it is acceptable or unacceptable standards of behavior. It establishes its own criteria for judging what it deems good or bad. And episteme is basically various narratives which tell you whether something is good, right, or wrong. It is a uh, it tells you about the binary oppositions. Then he moves on to the to his, because Foucault was basically an archaeologist. He believes that, like in archaeology, you need to remove everything layer by layer, step by step, level by level. Same is the case with history. In order to understand history, you need to, uh, you know, unearth various aspects of your society. Uh, in very gently, very slowly, and then you are going to hear history. By the word history, he means the narrative that has been established, which should be observed in order to reach a conclusion. Then he believes again, as these people, the Greenblatt, the originator of the theory, he believes that history actually has power. History is not, it is not something lame, it is not something innocent. It has power. And what is the power? Because history is reaching us through discourses. It is through this discourse that we develop our opinions. So, history can be Foucault, he tells you that how your literature, which is telling you about history, it helps you in developing narratives as well. Then he is giving you some examples of how epistemes of one historical period, they are one one historical period has many epistemes. Narrative is basically when narrative is your point of view, or you tell the story from your point of view. So because history is something which has a variety, it is dealing with a variety of subjects. So if history, there are so many uh, histories, so is the case with epistemes. There are a lot of epistemes as well. And it is through these epistemes that the historians, and they are not only influenced, but they are prejudiced as well. So these are some of the points which have been mentioned in the philosophy of Michel Foucault. Now let's come to the next one, Clifford Geertz. Geertz nahi hai. This is Geertz. So he is his time period is 1926 to 2006, and here he is adding to the philosophy of Foucault, and he has given you two basic concepts. Number one is, the first concept is that the culture, it's the definition of culture. He says that Gertz, according to Gertz, culture is a set of control mechanisms. Again, power wali baat aa jati hai. Plans, recipes, rules, instructions, whatever governs. Okay, whatever is powerful is culture. And every person, everything that is present around you in a certain time period, in a certain historical period, should be considered as a cultural artifact. Now, here he is giving you another important concept, and which is information gap. What is information gap? It is basically what one thinks things of things as they are, and uh, uh, and what we have to know to function in society. What are the things we know, and what are the other things that should be followed in order to create a better culture, in order to create a better narrative for the society. So this is, he says that this difference, or uh, this point which is missing in our comprehension, is called information gap. And it is this information gap which results in a subjective interpretation of, according to Gertz, it is this gap which is resulting in subjective interpretation of history. Then he gives you another important methodology which can help you in interpreting literature. He says that it is through the thick description, through the thick description that you can reach to a certain conclusion. What is thick description? He says that if you find something which is very unimportant, like it is a note from one beloved to another beloved, which has been hidden for centuries, which can tell you about the real history. Similarly, there is a very famous book, The Diary of Anne Frank. It is, though it is a diary, yet it is an important literary masterpiece as well. Uh, and why is that diary important? Because it is telling you about how people were treated in the concentration camps during World War II. So he says that the thick description can help you in getting to, in reaching a meaning. So this is the contribute, and then he again promotes that every human activity is interconnected. Now, then he moves on to the relationship between history and interpretation. The writer here tells you that text is not something, it is not a subjective expression. Rather, text is a social document which has the power to change, which can help people in changing themselves. So, and these texts are they are produced by about produced in a certain historical setting. However, text forms, or a text is produced uh, by or through the influence of a discourse, and this discourse is basically the result of the historical happenings of that time, historical settings of that time. So, it is through the text that we can reach the historical setting, and it can be otherwise as well. It is can through be through the study of history that we can understand a certain text, because history is, it does not produce one discourse. It produces a variety of discourses. It depends on us how we interpret a certain thing according to our understanding of life. Then he gives you the some of the principles of new historicism. The first being that every action is, all our actions are interrelated, and no act is significant, everything is important. You can't say that something is of less importance, everything is important for a new historicist. Then, the third principle of new historicism is that there is no single discourse that reveals the pathway to objective truth about ourselves or our world. Can we begin to interpret either our world or a text? So, you can't uh, reach the truth. You can't be objective in your interpretation, because there is no single discourse. Had there been one absolute single discourse, then obviously you would have reached an objective end, or objective conclusion, or objective interpretation. But this is not the case. Now, then the writer moves on to tell you about the objectives of cultural poetics. And what is it? That it is the formation and understanding of a poetics of culture. That culture is important, and the it is culture which determines your various texts. So, uh, and because our culture is very diversified, similar is the case with our interpretation. According to this, according to new historicism, this diversity gives birth to various interpretations. Okay, so then the writer goes on and tells you about the because variety gives birth to complexity and everything. Now, girls, this is a very important part on page 192. You need to learn this by heart. What cultural poetics rejects, what are the things that are not accepted by cultural poetics? What are they? Monological is grand, big, huge, concrete interpretations of a given culture, people, or historical era can accurately demonstrate that cultures, beliefs, and values. Their your mindset, or the mindset of a certain time period, they tell us about the culture of that time. It is not the case. A historian can establish the norms and the truths of any social order. He can generalize it on, even they reject generalizations. What does the word generalization mean? That, uh, see, if you are talking about the culture of Elizabethan times, the same was not happening in the subcontinent. तब वो सब कॉन्टिनेंट ही था ना, इंडो पाक सब कॉन्टिनेंट. So you can't say that these you know with finality, that in Elizabethan era, the literature of every corner of the world was thriving, or was successful. Here he says that the writer says that uh, they reject, the new historicists reject the overgeneralizations. A writer or a historian can be totally objective. This is also not the case. Autonomous artifacts, including literary texts, can or do exist. Literary artifacts can be studied in separately. They reject this. Literature is shaped by only historic moments. History serves as a background for literary study. It is only history, or the study of history, that is important. The rest of the things can be discarded. Only one correct interpretation of a text exists. He says this is also, they reject this. However, when what they promote is that history and literature, they are not separable. Number one, then literature has no history of its own, but is ensconced in cultural history. So, both of these aspects are uh, interrelated. Then the definitive interpretations of a text are unattainable. That is, you can't reach the text. They promote, they accept that one interpretation is not possible. It recognizes that power affects literature as deeply as it does history. So they believe in the power of literary texts and the power of culture. It believes that texts like forms of discourse help shape and are shaped by social forces. So, social forces affect discourse, and discourse affects social forces. Then uh, uh, you can't say that like old historicists, that only history is important, everything is important, culture is important. Then literature is shaped by historical moments while also shaping the individual reader of or listener to these texts. So both these things are interrelated. It believes that one of the most important elements in textual analysis is discovering how a text was formed, that is, investigating the historical and social moments surrounding a text production, not its supposed interpretation. कंफर्म्ड चीज़ों से जानेंगे तो आपको मतलब समझ आएगा, वरना नहीं आएगा. It believes that writers like texts are subjected to social biases, cultural influences, and political agendas. No writer or critic can ever be entirely objective. They accept. Then comes the methodology. In methodology, they have given you 6 or 7 points. The first major one is that they understand that language is not only that is spoken. Language includes everything. It includes not only the verbal language, but it also includes how literature is written, what type of language is used in social communication, everything. Then next point is that history is a narrative discourse. You can't, history cannot be segregated from from the culture. And it is through these discourses that we can interact with the historical situations, authors of various texts, readers at that time, and their present day cultures, and how those people, the readers of that time, are impacted by the writer of that time. Then they reject the beliefs of old historicism again, which say that history, literature, and other social activities as forms of discourse. They strongly reject the old historicism, which sees history as necessary background material for the study of literature. Then they believe that text is something, it is not something personal, it is a social production, and it should be dealt thus. And the meaning should be interpreted. The next one is meaning resides in cultural system. Meaning should not be interpreted in segregation. You should relate each and every uh, uh, piece of writing to the culture it was produced in. Then you cannot, they also say that no sweeping generalizations should be made in order to derive meaning. Everything, same incident can have a different interpretation for different people. Then they call text as culture in action. So if you need to know the culture of a certain area, of a certain place, you need to look at the text. And if you need to, if you look at the text of of a certain area, you are basically coming to know about the culture of that time period, of that place, everything. So, what are the questions for analysis? You are going to uh, learn 4 or 5 questions by heart, and what type of questions are asked, what are the type of behaviors and models of practice. Does this work reinforce why might readers at a particular time and place find this work compelling? Are there differences between your values and the values implicit in the work you are reading? On what social understanding does the work depend? Whose freedom of thought or movement might be constrained implicitly or explicitly by this work? Larger social structures, authorial biographies, biographical facts, and cultural events. They bring everything under question. Now, coming to the critiques of this theory, uh, th- this theory is very important because first of all, it challenges the established theory of that time, that is new criticism, number one. That is very important. Then it is important because it includes not only it challenges the old historicism as well, and the history is considered to be something uh, they considered history as something which was of sole importance, and whereas the new historicists, they believed that other things are equally important, and then they promoted the or they advocated that literature has power, and history also has power. Then another important concept they promoted was that your constructed narratives, they tell you about the power struggle in your society, in your text, in your culture, everything. However, there are certain objections to the theory as well, though it gained a lot of importance. But the most important thing is that this theory was um, a more subjective critiquing or way of critiquing. So this obviously led to a lot of criticism uh, on new historicism. However, still, if this theory had not been a very valid one, it would not have been practiced by, such such a huge geographical area in Great Britain and in Americas. So this is a very you can't say that this theory is not important, or nobody can say that this theory is unimportant or less important. So this brings us to the end of this theory, and again, it is based. Revising the two concepts on which this is based. Number one is that history is not everything. History should be supplemented by culture, the study of culture, the study of politics, the study of everything that is there in your lives. Secondly, text cannot be interpreted alone. It has to be uh, that, interpretation should be made according to the context. So, this is the end of this chapter. I'll see you next time, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.